The blockade worked. That is exactly why this war just became more dangerous. Most people are reading the seizure of the Iranian cargo ship as proof that Washington is back in control. I think that reading is shallow, yes. The destroyer stopped the ship, yes. The blockade was enforced, yes. America proved it can still use force at sea. But none of that solved the real problem. It may have made the real problem worse because the central problem in this war is no longer whether the United States can stop one ship. The central problem is that America can still enforce coercion, but it cannot turn coercion into a stable political result. That is the whole story. Now look carefully at the sequence. On Friday, Araghchi announced that Hormuz was open for the remainder of the ceasefire. Trump celebrated, markets rallied, oil dropped. The whole world wanted to believe that the opening of the Strait meant something larger was coming behind it. Some broader de-escalation, maybe even the architecture of a deal. But hidden inside the celebration was the line that mattered most. Trump also made clear that the American naval blockade of Iran itself would remain in full force until Tehran accepted a deal on Washington's terms. That was the contradiction. People heard open Strait. They ignored active blockade. They heard peace. They ignored pressure. That is why Friday was always unstable, because the real structure had not changed. America was still trying to combine diplomacy and humiliation, talks and coercion, de-escalation language and escalation logic that can work for a few hours on television. It does not work inside a real war. Within hours, the IRGC humiliated Araghchi in public. That was not just embarrassing, that was diagnostic. The foreign minister announced one reality. The security state announced another. The diplomat said the Strait was open. The armed system signaled that the Strait would only ever be open on its own terms. That is not ordinary bureaucratic friction. That is what I would call dual. State diplomacy, America is negotiating with one Iran while another Iran still controls the instruments that matter most. That is the trap. And once you see the trap, the ship seizure looks very different. The cargo vessel was not just a blockade runner. It was a test for weeks. The blockade turned ships around without direct confrontation. This ship kept going. Washington responded with force. The USS Spruance warned it, fired into the engine room, then Marines boarded it. Militarily, the operation proved the obvious: America still has the capability to enforce its blockade at sea. But politically, the meaning was much darker, because ask what that seizure told each side. It told Washington that force can still impose compliance in a narrow tactical sense. It told Tehran that every diplomatic opening is still being paired with coercion. It told Araghchi's camp that even when they create movement, they do not get trust in return. And it told the IRGC that their core argument was right. America still understands pressure better than settlement. That is why I think the seizure may have done more than stop one cargo ship. It may have strengthened the hardest people inside Iran. If Araghchi can only go into talks and come back with public humiliation, a reclosed strait, and a seized vessel, then he is not negotiating from strength. He is carrying American terms into a system that increasingly believes America cannot be trusted at all. That is why this is so dangerous. America is trying to produce a peace through a diplomat who cannot guarantee the behavior of his own state, while simultaneously using coercion in a way that strengthens the faction inside Iran that at least wants peace on American terms. That is strategic self-sabotage. And the confusion around the next round in Islamabad only reinforces the point. Even Washington could not keep its story straight. Was Vance leading? Was he not going? Was security the issue? Was Kushner central? Was Wickoff still trusted? Iran looked equally split. One official said, "No travel." That is not routine diplomatic ambiguity. That is what happens when both states are negotiating externally while fighting internally. A negotiation is never just two governments sitting across a table. A real negotiation is two internal coalitions trying to force their own system to accept the same reality. That is what is breaking down now. And once that internal coherence starts breaking down, the regional layer gets much darker. Lebanon's temporary ceasefire should have created room for de-escalation. Instead, it exposed more ambiguity. Hezbollah signaled caution, not surrender. Israel saw room to interpret the terms aggressively. Trump posted language that seemed to restrain Israel. Then his own White House softened it. That matters because it shows that even America's closest ally can no longer assume it fully understands Washington's line in real time. Then there are the Houthis, as Hormuz moved in and out of conditional openness. The other great maritime pressure point, Bab el-Mandeb, drifted back into the picture. If Hormuz is unstable and the Red Sea is unstable at the same time, then the war stops being a Gulf problem and becomes a systems problem. Europe gets hit, Asia gets hit, insurance gets hit, shipping gets hit, energy gets hit, inflation gets hit. That is why the UAE quietly exploring currency. Swap support matters more than people think. It tells you Gulf elites are no longer thinking only about missiles. They are thinking about reserves, liquidity, and what happens if the region stops looking like a protected financial zone and starts looking like a prolonged war risk zone. This is the real escalation. The war is no longer merely military. It is geopolitical, financial, and systemic. That is why the phrase, "the blockade worked," is much too small. Yes, the blockade worked in the narrow sense that one ship was stopped. But did it restore order? No. Did it produce trust? No. Did it strengthen the diplomatic side inside Iran? Almost certainly not. And in the worst possible way, it clarified that the person America talks to is not the person who can guarantee the Strait. That is the larger structural problem. Washington can still enforce the blockade. What it cannot do is convert enforcement into settlement. And that is the story too many people are missing. The United States still has force. It still has ships. It still has bombers. It still has a blockade. But the war has entered the stage where force is no longer the scarce commodity. Political coherence is, strategic credibility is, a believable end state is, and Washington has less of those than it thinks. That is why I say the blockade worked, and that is exactly why the war became more dangerous. Because America just proved it can stop a ship much more easily than it can produce a peace. And when a great power reaches that point, the tactical victories begin accumulating faster than the strategic ones. That is never the sign of a healthy war. It is the sign that the war is slipping out of the language used to justify it